engineers, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another tutorial. Today I will be showing you how to configure the AWS CLI. In case you're wondering what this is, in my first video I showed you how to deploy a simple web page in the cloud. And to do this we had to go through the AWS console. We logged in, did a few things, but in the real world things don't work that way. We try to do things via code. We use infrastructure as code. So everything is built writing code rather than logging in and doing things through the control panel. Now, to be able to run things like Terraform, which is infrastructure as code from our device, our local machines, we have to configure it. Now, with AWS, access could be different ways. You could have access to the console where you log in using a password. You log in and do a few things around. You can do what you want to do in the console, or you can use the CLI. That's the command line interface. With CLI, you can run commands on locally anywhere else, and that will link up with the AWS API in the cloud and do what you tell it to do. You can take the instructions and interpret them, or use the SDK where you write through software programs. They can use that to access the AWS services. Depends on how you configure. But today we'll be on using the CLI, because we need to. The next lesson will be about Terraform, infrastructure as code. And that wouldn't work unless you've configured AWS CLI on your local machine or anywhere else you want to run it from. So, this is the plan today. Okay, I'll give you a link where you can download the AWS CLI. Once that's done, then we shall do a few other things. That we need to go into AWS console. We need to create a user and then grant the user some permissions. After that, we need to generate an access key and a secret key. These two things will be used to authenticate our user. Okay, so we have to authorize the user with permissions, and then authenticate. That means be able to log in and do things. After that, we shall create an S3 bucket, which is a object storage in AWS. We'll create one in AWS manually, and when we configure our local machine for AWS CLI, then we shall try and test it and see if we can access that bucket without logging into the console right from our machine. Once that is done, then that's verification that we have set up our machine to work with the AWS CLI. And then the next video, we shall go into Terraform, which is infrastructure as code. So sit back, relax, and I'll see you at the terminal. See ya. So what's our task today? Okay, first thing first, you need to install AWS CLI. I'll post a link here when to do that. Or you can go online and look around many places how to install it. You can install for Windows, Mac, or Linux, whichever system you use. So let me just get the link and post it here. So at your own time, there it is. You just need to install AWS CLI on your local machine, because today is about the CLI and how to configure it. Okay, so once you've installed that, you can follow the instructions you see online. That's okay. And then we go to steps for today. And this is what we'll be doing today in this task, this project for today. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, we need to create a user. Okay, we need to create a user in AWS and grant the user the permissions. to create objects, to create resources in AWS. Okay. Now, in this tutorial, I would grant the user admin access, full admin access, administrator access. But in the real world, you have to make sure you have to follow the least privilege rule. Only grant permissions needed for a particular task. So you have to actually create a particular role, grant a particular permissions to that role, and grant it to the user. Don't give more permissions than required. Okay, so when we create a user, then we need to create an access key and a secret key. Now we create a user in AWS to grant the permissions and privileges. Now that's what we call we give the user access, to do something with AWS. So that's called authorization. So number one is create a user and authorization and grant him the permissions. Secondly, we create an access key and a secret key for that user. Now that's what we call authentication, because with this access key and secret key, the user will be able to log into AWS and carry out some actions. So this is just log into AWS. After we have done that, we shall configure the AWS CLI with our credentials. That's the access key and secret key. So once we've done that, then we need to test it to make sure we have access. Make sure it's working properly. That means we can actually connect into our AWS cloud without having to go into the console. That means we can actually run commands and interact with the AWS cloud from our local machine. Once we can do that, we know that AWS CLI is working. Okay. So what I will do for this is I will create an object like an S3 bucket. It's object storage in AWS. I'll do that manually so that when we've done all this configuration, we shall see if we can retrieve information about that bucket from our command line from the AWS CLI. Okay. Yes. So just a recap. Okay. So we're going to install AWS CLI yourself. When you've done that, the steps are: we create a user in AWS, grant the required permissions. That means we authenticate. No, we authorize, and then we create an access key and secret key. Then we authenticate, and then we configure the CLI with these credentials. That's the access key and secret key, and then we configure the AWS CLI and test it with an S3 bucket, which we've already created in the console earlier. Okay, so this is about all we need to get started. I hope you understand what the task today is. Okay, AWS CLI is how we interact with AWS from the command line. That means we don't have to go in there to interact. We can just write code, write scripts, and perform actions or retrieve information from it. Okay. Yes. So hold on. Let's get ready for the next thing. So I said yes. We shall. Okay. So let's go. Let me just show you what to do for AWS CLI. You can just search in Google, install AWS CLI there. And there's some documents from AWS, Amazon. So that's the best place to get that from. Amazon owns AWS CLI, so they'll give you the best versions. It'll be safer as well. So go there. That's the docs AWS. You can see that there. That's the AWS documents. And install update latest version of CLI. You can install or update the latest version. They can see you've got Linux, Mac, or Windows. Click on that and install the one that would will match your local machine. Okay. Yes. So that's the bit on AWS CLI installation. It shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes to install completely, but that's not covered in this tutorial. Also, you might use this time to install Terraform as infrastructure as code. We shan't use Terraform in this demonstration, but we'll use it in the next video. So it'll be nice if you have it already running on your machine. So there you can see, just go to Terraform. HashiCorp is the company that has released Terraform. Go there, install it for your system, Windows, Linux, Mac, whichever, and get it installed, so that the next video you wouldn't have to go through all this again. So we want to have the AWS CLI and Terraform installed before our next video, where we start going to infrastructure as code. But this video is just about AWS CLI, so let's keep it simple. Okay. So now what we're going to do now is we're going to go into IAM, that's Identity and Access Management. That's how you create users manually in AWS. Identity and Access Management, how you create users, roles, policies, anything to do with access. Identity and Access Management is done here. So we go in there. Now we're going to create a user. Remember we talked about authorization. So we need to create a user and grant the permissions to create objects. Okay, we need to authorize the user. So let's give a username. Click on user. Let's give a username. Always use something that's meaningful so that you know what you're doing. Because we plan to use Terraform later, we just call it my Terraform user. That's the name of the user we're creating in an AWS account. Now remember, never use your root account, which is the main account, to do all this. Root account is just for maybe creating other things. Don't use your root account to perform other actions. No, it's bad practice. Okay, and it's very, very risky. So create my Terraform user. Okay, now we've named it. Now add user to group. You have other options. You can attack the policy directly, but in this case, we want to make it simple. So we're going to just attach the user to the administrator group, administrator access, admin group, so that he has all permissions. In the real world, we wouldn't do this because that's too risky. We don't give them all that power. We'd have to use the list privilege rule. Give only the required permissions, not more. Okay? So yes, so there we've given the administrator thing, and then you can see my Terraform user, that's our user. This is the page for the user we're creating. Let's give it a tag, a name, so that we know. Also, it's always nice to tag your resources when they're created. Okay. So hold on, let's see. Yeah. So let's just review this. My Terraform user, that's the one created, if you remember. Yes. You can see console password type says none because we want to do it only through the command line, the CLI, AWSCLI. Let's click create user. Now our user is being created successfully. Okay. So now let's view our user. That's below. You can see my Terraform user. That's one we've created. Okay. Yeah. So my Terraform user is created successfully. Now we need to generate the access key and secret key, so we can authenticate, so that our programs will be able to log into AWS and authenticate, so that we have access from externally into AWS. So create access key. Click on that. Now remember we wanted the CLI, AWS CLI command line interface. So we want to access through the AWS CLI. So we're going to select the command line interface in this case. The other ways to do that, but for this use case, it's going to be the CLI, which we need. So we shall select the CLI. Yes. The CLI. to enable the AWS CLI to access your AWS account. So that's the plan for today. So let's leave the rest. Let's confirm that we want to proceed to create access key, to create the access key, and then next. Now a description, that's optional. Oh yeah, but I'll give it one. Let's just say my Terraform access key. That's what that's for. And create. So now we have created an access key. Now be careful here, because you have access key and secret key. First of all, you have to keep this safe, because nobody should know this. If anybody has access to this, they could get into your accounts. They can cause major damage. They can cause mayhem, because they're going to have uncontrolled access to your resources. But you can see here, I've shown you mine, but by the time you see this, you'll be gone. After this demonstration, I'll be removing that user, I'll be deleting this credentials. So you have to keep them safely, and if possible, keep it encoded and encrypted. Because if they get in the wrong hands, that could be very, very costly and painful experience. Okay? So you can see here it says never store your access key in plain text or in a code repo. Basically, nobody else should have access to this except you. Okay, so, and also something else, you need to copy this now and keep it somewhere, because as soon as you leave this page, you cannot access the secret key anymore. You have access key, but secret key was gone forever. You have only one chance to copy it and keep it somewhere. Okay, so you see it says never store in a plain text or in code. It shouldn't show. And also enable least privilege permissions, as I said earlier. Okay, now let's click done. Okay, so now we have created access key and secret key, and yes, and I have copied and saved it somewhere on my machine just for this demonstration, which I would delete and get rid of as soon as we're finished. Okay, so now we've gone through the first two stages. We have gone through the authorization, that's by creating the user and giving the privileges to create resources, and now we've gone through the authorization. We have created access keys, access key and secret key, with which we shall be able to log into the AWS cloud account, which we have via the AWS CLI from the command line. That's a very powerful tool, because now we don't have to go into the console to do anything. We just do everything from the command line or in code. Okay, so now we've done one, we've done two. We've created a user, created an access key and a secret key for that user. Yes. The next stage is we need to configure AWS CLI with our credentials. Yes. So we need to use the secret key and access key and feed this to AWS CLI so that we wouldn't need to do that again. It will store it in a safely, and we won't have to do that each time we need to access via the CLI. It was already configured for that purpose. Now, before we do this, I'm going to create an S3 bucket, which is object storage in AWS, because I want us to test this, make sure it's working. So I'll create this bucket. I'll give it a name, something like test bucket. So that when it's created in the console, when we've configured everything else, we'll just test and see if we can actually query AWS from the command line and get a result back. If it's successful, that means it's actually working. Our CLI is well configured, because that means we can actually interact with AWS, without having to visit the console. Okay, so I'll create an S3 bucket called test bucket in AWS, and we'll try to view it in the AWS CLI. Okay. Now, first of all, before we do this, you need to check to make sure your AWS CLI is working. Okay, before you even configure, maybe install it. You need to run a command, AWS -- version. If it gives you a version, then you know that okay, the CLI has been installed properly. Now we can configure. Okay, if you don't get that, then you need to try and install again or troubleshoot to get it installed, because if we don't get the CLI installed properly, then we can't even configure it. Okay. So I've already installed AWS CLI in mine, so I wouldn't install again. But we just check, run the command AWS -- version, and to see if it will return an AWS version. If it does, then it has been installed properly. Okay. So AWS version. Okay, so I have an error because I did one hyphen, so it's 2 hyphens. Sorry about that. AWS -- version. Enter. Okay. Yes, you can see we've got a version now, AWS CLI. It shows version 2.11.4. It also shows the Python version. Python is a programming language as well. You can see, we have feedback. So AWS CLI is properly installed on my machine. Okay, so that's one thing done. So now let's try and configure this AWS CLI. Okay, as I said, if your version is displayed, then you have properly configured. AWS CLI has been properly installed. Yes. Okay. Yes. So we're going to, as said, create a test bucket, S3 bucket in the console, and try and interact with AWS, see if the CLI has been configured properly. So to do this, let's first of all create a bucket. Okay, it's called an S3 bucket. Let's type in S3 here, and it should give us you can see S3, the scalable storage in the cloud. S3 bucket can be used to do things like it can store almost anything, even a static web page could be stored in an S3 bucket. It's actually, they say it has no limit. It has no size limit. It can take any amount of data, any amount of storage. Okay, so let's create buckets. There. Now I'll show you one thing. For an S3 bucket name, has to be unique globally. Nobody else in the world must have used that name in a bucket. So I'm going to just type in things, and we'll get a bit of errors because it's not unique. I'll just type this in. Okay, a region US East 1. Now AWS, you have to seek regions. Select regions where you're working. Most times you get a region that's closest to you, but you don't have to. I always use US East 1 because I'm just used to it. Okay, when I'm playing around with it. Okay, so let's leave this settings the way they are, because we're just creating a bucket just to test. Them. Okay. Versioning, we can enable. That means we can create a new version without having to delete the old one. Let's give it a name, just so that we can refer to later. Name. We can call it, what value we give this? We said we'll give it test bucket. Okay. Let's see, what else do we need here? Encryption, yes, it's by default, it's selected, server-side encryption. That's okay. A bucket key, let's leave that as default. Go down and let's create the bucket. Now we'll get some errors because I said before, a few things are left out intentionally. One thing will be the bucket name. And how do I say this? Yeah, and also by mistake I clicked an extra tag. Let's move that tag, okay? And let's go back and create bucket. This still won't work because the bucket name is not unique. You see, it's saying bucket name must not contain uppercase characters, and also it must be unique globally. So you see, already exists. Let's go again, create buckets. No, I can't go back there. So we have to get a unique bucket name. It has to be unique. So I might as well just give it, append it with my name to make it unique. That's test bucket daily. Yes, now yes, nobody else has thought of this yet, so that's fine. Now we can save and create our S3 bucket. Okay, as I said, S3 is just object storage in the cloud. It's an AWS object storage in the cloud. So now you can see we've got two buckets. We just created test bucket daily, and we have another one called Terraform on AWS EKS bucket, which I created sometime in April. So when I was working on a different project. So yeah, we have two buckets, test bucket daily and Terraform on AWS EKS bucket. Two buckets are currently in AWS accounts. Okay, so when we query this through the CLI, if the CLI is well configured, we should be able to get into this without going to the console and retrieving the values of the names of our buckets via the command line. Okay, so let's go back. Time to configure our CLI. So the command for that is AWS configure, and it will give us, first of all, let's change this bucket name to what we did, because remember we called it test bucket daily. So that old name didn't work, so test bucket daily. That's fine. That's our new bucket name. Let's not forget that. Yes. Okay. Yes. And as I said, we need to run the command AWS configure, which will allow us to start to configure the CLI for programmatic access to our AWS account. So to configure the AWS CLI with our credentials, that's the access key and secret key we created earlier, we shall run the command AWS configure. AWS configure, that's the command, that's the magic words. And once we run it, it would prompt us to enter access key, secret key, default output, and our region. I've been using US East 1. It's one of the zones, the regions in AWS. So would enter access key, our secret key, our default region. Mine is in US East 1A. You would see us when you run AWS accounts, you would see a region which you pick. You would decide what region you want to use as your default region. Okay. And lastly, it will ask you what kind of a default output you want. I select JSON for output format, JSON. Okay. Those are the four things it will prompt you for when you run AWS configure. So the four things you need to put in there. Okay. So let's now go to the command line and do this. Okay. So type in AWS configure, and it should prompt us for these four values. So I presume you've kept your access key and secret key somewhere safe, because now you need to input it there to configure your CLI to have access to your account in the cloud. So AWS configure, enter. It's a bit slow, it's like it's busy. What's going on here? Hold on, please. These things happen sometimes. Okay, I've done that. Hold on, AWS configure. Okay, I didn't enter, that's why. Now you can see it's asking for the access key. I'm just going to copy and paste. It's showing my old access key for a different account, but we're going to override that now. I'm going to paste in the ones we just created now, earlier on today. So let me just grab and paste my new access key. Hold on, just grabbing that now. Grab and paste it there. Hold on, please. That is, I'm showing you this, but it doesn't matter. Normally, I wouldn't show. No one should see this, but because I'm just doing this, I'm going to delete everything as soon as we finish this demonstration. So it's begun. Okay. Secret key. This no one should ever see, because that would be, I said, might be very costly to your organization. So that's my secret key there. Pasted it. Yes. Now the default region, I'm going to keep it US East 1, and for output, I'm going to keep it as JSON. So these are the 4 things we need to configure our CLI. Okay, just yes, so enter that, and now our CLI should be configured. So remember we created an S3 bucket, and there was one already there. So we have 2 S3 buckets in the AWS account, flying the cloud. In US East 1, that's actually in America. We have this 2 buckets in America. I am in London here, and I'm going to query use the on the command line and get without going into the console. I'm going to get details of the S3 buckets in the account. So to get S3 buckets, the command is going to be AWS S3 ls. That's going to help us to list the S3 buckets in our AWS account, if there are any. So, but we know that there are 2 there now. We get, we have one we called, I think, test bucket daily -daily, and the other one was on the AWS Terraform EKS, something like that. So we have 2. Okay. So to view our S3 buckets, which have an ALS, which I run the command. Hold on, please. Into AWS list S3. Hold on. Go on. Okay. Actually, I think it's AWS S3 ls. AWS S3 ls. Not list S3. AWS S3 ls. That is the command. Yes, S3 ls to list S3 buckets from our AWS CLI. So when that command is going to go through, authenticate, authorize itself, go in there, query AWS far away, and return the names of our buckets. Once this works, then we're ready for infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code, the next lesson. That means we're ready to go. So let's go to the command line and run, there it is, and run AWS S3 ls. Let's hold our breaths. If this works, yes, we are good to go for the next lesson, next video. That means we have properly set up, we've configured. Yes, there it is. You can see We've got the test bucket delay there, and also Terraform on AWS case bucket. So we have successfully retrieved the names. We've listed the buckets created in the AWS console right from our command line. So that is, ladies and gentlemen, now we have successfully configured the AWS CLI. That's brilliant. So it's been, I hope it's been quite easy to follow. So remember the steps. We created a user, gave the permissions, we created access key and secret key. We used those details to configure the AWS CLI. We created S3 buckets in the console, and from our CLI now, we retrieve the details of what was in the console. So that's evidence that our CLI has been properly configured. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed this. I did. And now you've learned how to configure the AWS CLI and how to interact programmatically with the AWS cloud. So we're ready for the next stage. The next video, we shall try doing our first project, but this time using Terraform. It's infrastructure as code. So we shall use Terraform to build the infrastructure. We used last time the VM, and then we shall use Terraform to deploy our web page on the VM. So thanks for watching. Don't forget, please subscribe, like, and share. And I'll see you again soon in the next video. Thanks for your time. Thank you.